Certain point. But Wellspring, this is week 2 of our series through the book of Romans. It's written by the Apostle Paul, and he's writing this letter to a small group of believers in Rome. He has never made it to Rome before. We've seen in our previous series, and if you've read the New Testament, that Paul goes on these missionary journeys, spreading the gospel to the Gentiles all over the Roman Empire. But as of to this point, he has never made it to Rome, even though he's made multiple attempts to get there. But he's writing this book to a small group of believers there, and Rome is the seat of power for the entire world. Up to this point in history, the world had never seen a more powerful empire than Rome. It was completely unmatched in its beauty and its architecture, its power, the arts, the culture, the sheer expanse of its reach, and the might of its military power overshadowed every other empire that ever existed before it. It was the greatest thing that anyone had ever seen. But for Rome, in all of its beauty and all of its power, beneath the surface was a very different story. Ooh, how many people can relate to that? Beneath the surface, there's another story going on. Rome was a place marked by moral decay. There was idolatry on every corner, power that was constantly abused, and a culture that elevated pleasure over the truth. That doesn't sound familiar at all, right? Rome looked strong on the outside, but spiritually, it was collapsing from within. And it's important to understand that context when we come to the book of Romans, because it does sound eerily familiar to our own culture. And yet, in that world, that's where the gospel came. Rome, in all of its power and glory, I said this last week, was under attack by a kingdom not of this world. A kingdom that was led by a conquering, crucified king whose servants were armed with a weapon more powerful than anything Rome had ever seen or Rome could produce. Not a weapon made of bronze or iron, but a weapon made of truth and love. It's the gospel. And Rome, in all of its might and all of its majesty, could not stand against it. That's what this letter is about. This letter is about the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is thick with doctrine. This letter that we're going to go through, there's going to be some really thick passages that we go through that's thick with doctrine and theology, that's rich with application and different pastoral guidance for your life. But this series will challenge you, particularly today. This series will challenge you. There's going to be a lot of things that you and I are going to struggle with, ideas that you have held on to that this letter will ask you to let go of. There's going to be parts that aren't going to be soft or shallow, and you will be comforted throughout this letter, even throughout this message today, but you will be confronted. The series is going to ask you, it's going to expect you to change. And so here's the big idea for the series. I introduced it last week. If you want to write it down, you can. You're going to hear it every week for the next handful of weeks. But the gospel is God's power to save us, to change us, and to send us. It's the gospel that's God's power to save us and to change us and to send us. Salvation, transformation, and mission or purpose are all byproducts of believing and clinging and applying the gospel to our lives. And like I said last week, it's not just information. When we introduced this gospel message last week, it's not just information, it's not just guidance, it's not just motivation or inspiration. And I don't want to demonize those things like they're not good, like there's something wrong with information, there's something wrong with guidance or motivation or inspiration. If you've ever been on a run or on a workout, some motivation is very helpful at certain moments. But what I'm saying is that the gospel is in a completely different category than those things. It's a completely different category than different guidance that you can find for your life. It's a different category than something that will motivate you when you're down. It's a different category than something that will inspire you when you're going through a difficult time. The gospel is different. It is God's power to save us. It's God's power to transform us, to change us, and to send us out into the world. It's the gospel that transforms you. But as Paul shows us last week and even this week how powerful the gospel is, he's going to show us today why we need it, why I need the gospel. What we're about to read today is not an easy passage. It's one of the most difficult passages a lot of times in the New Testament that some people will read and struggle with. It's not popular. It's not comfortable. And if we're honest, it's pretty offensive. But we don't come to Scripture to edit it. That's a big idea. We don't come to the Scriptures to edit it. We come to let it read us as much as we read the Scriptures. That's one of the reasons why I want to encourage you to read the Bible, whether it's every day, however the program that you read, if it's just a verse every day. We come to the Scriptures and it reads us as much as we read it. And Paul begins this section talking about the wrath of God. Oh, perfect day for it. A little stormy out. I was hoping maybe that the lightning bolt would strike just as soon as I said that, because that would have been awesome. But Paul starts this section talking about the wrath of God. And when we hear that word wrath, we tend to think of uncontrolled anger or explosive rage. That's what my wrath sounds like, right? My wrath a lot of times is just, if you follow me around in traffic, especially if you're around this week for me. I don't know why, but I behaved especially bad this week in the car. You would have seen a lot of my wrath come out. But that's not what this is talking about when we read this. God's wrath is holy. It's his holy, settled, righteous response to sin and evil, right? That is not what my wrath is. My wrath is not holy, and it's not typically a response to sin and evil. It's just typically a response to not going fast enough when the light turns green, right? Or just not knowing how to merge or anything. That's when my wrath comes out a lot of times. That's not God's wrath. It's an expression of his justice. My wrath, and likely your wrath, has nothing to do with justice. It just has to do with what we think isn't right at the moment. My wrath is typically tied to an inconvenience. God's wrath is an expression of his justice, because if God wasn't just, he wouldn't be good. And as we read this, it's going to feel uncomfortably familiar, right? Because what was true in Rome is true also in our world today. And here's the hard part. If we're honest, it's also true in us. As I was preparing this message, I really wanted this passage to be about someone else besides me. But eventually I just came to the realization, I submitted to the fact that this passage is about me. And the truth is, I am far more like Rome than I really am ready to admit. And that's the truth for you. You are far more like Rome than you'd like to admit. And so this passage isn't meant to push us away from God. It's meant to show us why we need him. And before Paul really gets into the good of the good news, he shows us how bad the bad news really is. And so before we jump into this, do not ask this question that they're going to put up on the screen. Do I agree with this? That is not the question to ask when we come to a passage, really anything in Scripture. Do I agree with this? Does this agree with me? This is not the question to ask today. The question is, am I willing for God to tell me the truth about me? That's a big question. That's a huge difference. Do I agree with this passage that I'm going to read? Or am I willing for God to tell me the truth about me? Am I willing to sit under the weight of this before I just rush to escape it? Because if the gospel is the power of God to save us, change us, and send us, then this is where we begin to see why we need saving in the first place. So with that in mind, if you have your Bibles, and I hope you do, turn with me to Romans chapter number 1. We're going to start reading in verse number 18. Paul is going to show us the reality of a world, of a heart that has rejected God, right? So we're going to start reading verse number 18. It says, "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who," watch this, "who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what we may know about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that the people are without excuse." Paul's saying here, like, hey, the fact that God is and who he is evident through creation. So no one has an excuse to go like, oh, well, I just didn't think God was a thing. We'll talk about that in a minute. In verse number 21, "For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore, God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is praised forever. Amen. Because of this," here's this phrase again, "God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned their natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with one another and received in themselves the due penalty for their error. Furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over to a depraved mind, so that they do what ought not to be done. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They're gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. Although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but also approve of those who practice them." Woo! Paul comes out with some fire this morning. That's a rough one. There's a phrase that we use sometimes when life starts to unravel, when we feel life unraveling around us. We say this phrase, you've probably heard this, you've probably said this. Things are just falling apart. Right? And maybe you've looked out at the world recently and you go, man, things seem like they're falling apart. Or maybe in your own life and you go, this is falling apart. Maybe you've been there. Maybe it seems like life is unraveling at the seams. Maybe it seems even worse than things just falling apart, right? If you're a patron of the arts, maybe this line will remind you when Lloyd tells Harry in the timeless classic Dumb and Dumber, he says, "We have no food. We have no jobs. Our pets' heads are falling off." Like just complete, like, man, this is the worst experience ever, right? This passage paints a really sad reality. But Romans 1 shows us not just something sad, but something a lot more sobering than that. It doesn't just show us like a random collapse, right? Even when we look at the Roman Empire, it wasn't just some random collapse. And that typically doesn't happen in your life either. It's not like you just woke up on Sunday morning and you're like, you know what? I think my whole life's going to fall apart today. I think that's how that's going to happen. It's not a random collapse that we see. It's worse than that. It's a directional drift that happens. Like that's what this passage describes, a directional drift. Paul is describing what happens when a society, when a culture, and most importantly, when a heart slowly moves away from God. And hear me, it is easy to disassociate ourselves from a passage like this and think that it's talking about someone else, right? The translation that we read wasn't super helpful because it kept on calling them they. They do this, they do that, they do this. And the first time I read that, I was like, yeah, how dare they do that, right? But then I realized, like I said, this passage isn't about someone else. He's not talking about someone else. He's not. This passage is about me. This passage is about you. And the haunting phrase that gets repeated 3 different times is this phrase when it says, God gave them over. It says God gave them over to sinful desires. God gave them over to shameful lust. God gave them over to a depraved mind. Not because God is absent, not because God just says, whatever, I don't care anymore. I started everything and now I'm gone. Not that. But because God is honoring human choice. You are so hell-bent on this. This is what you want. I will honor you by this is what you want. So lean in with me as we walk through some of these verses that describes what happens when we turn away from God. The first thing, number 1, is that truth is suppressed. It says it right early on in the first couple verses. Paul says that the truth is plain because God has made it known through creation. Listen, there is something innate in all of us that knows that there's something bigger than us out there. You look throughout all kinds of different cultures all around the globe, we all have this innate understanding that there is something out there bigger than us. We look at creation and see its beauty and wonder. We see its order and design. And since the beginning, we've looked up into the stars and seen something that is plainly evident. We did not make this. Someone else made this. We look at sunrises and sunsets and go, this is incredible. This is so much beauty and wonder. Where did this come from? You look into the eyes of a child, your own child that you're holding for the first time, and something miraculous happens in you when you see this, and you're just overflowing with love, and you go, where did this come from? There's something plainly evident to us that there's something bigger than us out there. What does that mean? That means that the issue is not a lack of information. When we suppress the truth, it's not because there's a lack of information out there, like we would never know that God created anything or that God exists. We could never figure that out. It's not that there's a lack of information, it's that there's resistance. People don't drift into atheism because there's not enough evidence, right? As someone who has had lots of conversations with atheists or self-proclaimed atheists, people don't drift into atheism because they're like, well, I just don't see any evidence for God. They might say that line's popular, but then you actually have a conversation with them, and it's like, oh, you're just angry. Something bad happened to you when you were a kid. Me too. Like we can talk about that. People don't drift into it because there's no evidence. We drift because we resist the truth that we already see, the truth that we already see in the world. The problem is not intellectual. The problem is spiritual. That's the problem that I have. That's the problem that we have with suppressing the truth. It's not intellectual. It's spiritual. There's a strange assumption in culture that atheists are smart and Christians are dumb, right? I've had lots of conversations with Christians, and they're like, I have an atheist friend. I'm afraid to bring up faith to him because he just seems really, really smart. Like that's a misconception. Maybe you think the opposite. Maybe you think it's vice versa. Like you're a Christian because you figured something out that like an atheist just couldn't figure it out. They just couldn't get their mind wrapped around it. That's not the case either. I'll tell you, like I've met dumb people in every flavor. Like they make them in all shapes and sizes. Stupidity comes in every shape and size. It's out there. It's not an intellectual problem. It's spiritual. C.S. Lewis was the one who said, I believe in Christianity as I believe the sun has risen. Not only because I see it, I can clearly see this thing, but because by it, I see everything else. It's not an intellectual struggle that people have. It's a spiritual struggle. God himself has made himself known, but humanity has pushed away from the truth of that. And all of us experience that. All of us know that that's what we've experienced in our own journey and what we see going on in the world. So that's the first thing that happens when we start to turn away from God, when a culture turns away from God, or maybe even in your heart right now, you feel like, man, I want to suppress what is true. The second thing that we see in this passage is worship gets exchanged. There's this wild thing that happens is that they exchange what they should be worshiping for something else. Paul outlines this exchange when he says they exchange the glory of God to worship images, to worship idols, right? And we're going to talk about idols in a second. But this is the exchange that they make. And we know this throughout different culture and history where people would worship different statues and stuff like that. And you think, how did people ever do that, right? And it's like, yeah, I don't know how people would ever worship like a glass tablet that they would just walk around and spend 8 hours a day looking into constant. I don't know how people could ever do anything like that. Like, of course, we do that. Right? It exchanges the glory of God for images and idols. You exchange worshiping the Creator for created things. But here's the reality. Human beings, as long as we've been around, have never stopped worshiping. Like, it is in us to worship. Everyone you know, regardless of what they claim, everyone is worshiping something. And we either worship the God who made us, or we worship something he made. But get this, whatever we worship, this is a big idea. Whatever we worship, we become like. That's true. Whatever we worship, we become like. That's the reason why worshiping the wrong thing can be so destructive. You wonder, like, why is God, like, make such a huge deal about worshiping idols and about why this is bad? It's not only because he's saying, I'm the only one who's worthy of worship, but he's also saying, hey, this is bad for you. Like, this is destructive for you because whatever you worship, you will become like. That's the reason why idolatry is not neutral. Idolatry is never neutral because it reshapes your identity. This is a big idea. I want you to wrestle with this. Idolatry isn't just neutral. It's not like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, why is he making such a huge deal out of worshiping idols? Why were there so many times in the Old Testament where you see really harsh punishment for idol worship? And God is saying, hey, go and tear down all the altars that are to these false gods and to these other idols. Why is that such a big deal? Because idol worship is not neutral. It reshapes your identity. It reshapes how you view yourselves. But I don't think there's a whole lot of us in here that are carrying around like maybe little carved images of gods that you worship, right? I don't think that that's maybe the most popular thing among us. But it doesn't take much effort. It doesn't take much effort to identify the modern idols that you and I are probably worshiping, right? If you're like me, some modern idols that we can worship is approval. I want to be approved of. I want people to say good things about me. I'm looking for approval. We worship money. We worship stuff. We worship sex. We worship control. We worship comfort. These are the things, the modern idols that we attach our hearts to. And they are reshaping our identity away from Christ. It's the reason why there's warnings over and over and over again. Don't do this, because when you give your heart to these things, it reshapes who you are. I mean, think about your own life. Was there a time in your life where you were so focused on money? Man, I got to have more money. I need to make more money. Maybe you're just stressed and worried about money. And so all that you're thinking about is money, 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 money. And it starts to interact how you think and how the choices that you make. And it reshapes who you are. The same thing could be said about all kinds of stuff. Materialism, sex, control, comfort. You reshape who you are in your pursuit of those things. So here's some simple and serious advice when it comes to those idols, those modern idols that we attach our heart to. Put them to death. Like, tear them down. Replace them with Christ. You say, well, why? Why? Why do I have to do that? Like, I love approval, isn't it? So I should have disapproval from everyone? Everywhere I go, people should disapprove of me? I should be poor? I can't have money? Like, is that what you're saying? I can't have money? Money's bad. Approval is bad. Stuff is bad. You don't like having nice things, Brian? Like, are you sure? What about control? Am I supposed to be completely out of control in my life? I can't pursue comfort. I can't want to be comforted. I should love to be in pain. Is this the only solution? I have to exchange all those things and then I can get Christ, but everything's okay. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that all of those things are bad, all of those things are evil, and that's why you should tear them down. I'm saying you should tear them down because what happens if you don't tear them down? What happens if you don't put Christ in the rightful place as Lord of your life, the one who you worship? Because what happens when people worship the wrong things is number 3, that phrase that we looked at over and over and over again. God gives them over, it says. It says God gives them over 3 different times. God gives them over to their sinful desires. God gives them over to shameful lust. God gives them over to a depraved mind. There's a saying that I've heard in church forever ago, and you've probably heard it too, that says, sin takes you further than you wanted to go. Sin keeps you longer than you meant to stay. And sin costs you more than you intended to pay. But that's what sin does to our life. It takes us further than we were wanting to go. You ever been there? You ever say, well, I'll dabble in this a little bit, and then all of a sudden you're way off the deep end. You go, how did this happen? You go, man, maybe I'll just do this for a little bit. I'm just going to change this just for a little bit. I'm only going to do this for a moment. I'm only going to be in this relationship. I'm only going to do this thing just for a little bit. And all of a sudden it's like, man, I broke up with this dude, but I've been dating the same dude. Like, he has different names, but this is just what I'm doing now. I live here now, I guess, right? It takes you further than you want to go. It keeps you longer than you want to stay. That's what sin does to us. And this is what Paul is describing. Like, this is what God does. See, it's not that he's losing control, that God just loses control. Like, this is God just taking a step back and saying, if this is what you want, you are so bent on this life, you want these sinful desires, you want this type of life, you want to appear important, then I will allow you to have it. He steps back. This is where, by the way, the fear of the Lord the Bible talks about, this is where this begins. Not that God is going to step in and strike you with a lightning bolt and say, like, I can't believe you bought that new car. Not that. This is where the fear of the Lord begins. Not that he's going to step in and punish you so badly, but because sometimes the most severe judgment is not God's intervention. It's his withdrawal. That's what we see here in Romans. It's not that God's going to strike you with a lightning bolt. It's that he'll give you what you're so desperate for, what you think is going to satisfy you, what you think is going to make you happy. He'll step back and say, this is fine. If this is what you want, you are free to have it. He will allow humanity to experience what we have chosen without restraint. And some people, it's hard to conceptualize that because it goes against the idea that we have that people build the image of God that they build in their mind. Some of us think that God is some like intergalactic bouncer that stands at the gate of heaven, right? And everybody's just trying to rush into heaven. And so God stands at the gate as some intergalactic bouncer and goes, well, I like you. You can come in, but not you. You did too much bad stuff, and I don't like your haircut, and you're cool, so you can come in. Like as if he's choosing, oh yeah, no, you can come, you can say. That is not the case. All of humanity has not been rushing to try to get into heaven, and God's going, no, not everybody. It's the exact opposite. All of humanity for all time has been running as hard and as fast as our desires will carry us in the other direction. And what we read in the gospel is God reaching into our denial, reaching into our determination to have our own way, to have everything for ourselves, to appear important. And the gospel is God reaching into our race towards destruction and saying, no, I am not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. And that's what we find in the gospel. It's not God, like I said last week, shouting instructions from heaven to say, try harder, but him diving into our story to rescue us and to bring us to life. When God allows us to experience what we want without constraint every single time, the result that I get in my life is disorder and pain every time. When I'm so hell-bent on getting everything that I want, when I want my own way, when I want everything for myself, when I want to appear important, the result that happens in my life is disorder and pain. And we see it in the world around us. It's easy to look and see examples in the world around us. But like I said, if we're really honest, this goes on in us. We see moral confusion when we look around in the world, like what's right and wrong anymore? Like who even knows what's right and wrong anymore? I say this is right, you say that's wrong, whatever. You go do the wrong thing, I go do the right thing, and I guess there is no real right and wrong anymore. We see it in the world, but you do it in your own life. I do it in my life. I heard somebody say, Jamie used this phrase the other day, it's like, oh, well, we all have portions of the Bible that we ignore. We just ignore different portions, that's all. It's like, yeah, sure. Like what's right and what's wrong anymore? This is what happens. It's just this moral confusion. And then what happens out of that is you get this relational breakdown because who knows what's right and wrong anymore, and I'm just going to do whatever I want, whatever makes me happy. What happens is the relationships that I have, they get damaged. I wound people or people wound me, and I want to isolate myself out of that. So not only do I get this moral confusion, but all my relationships are dysfunctional and broken everywhere I go, and I want to isolate and be alone. And then on top of that, like to make matters even worse, I have this internal complete disintegration that happens inside of me where my mental health or my identity is completely out of control. And we see it everywhere. And I see it in me sometimes. Like, tell me that's not the world that we live in. But unfortunately, it doesn't stop there. It keeps going. When we reject God, the fourth thing that we see is that sin becomes celebrated. So last verse 32, he makes a big deal out of this. Sin gets what begins as rejection. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's right. I'm just going to kind of do my own thing. I'm going to figure this out on my own. I'm going to do what I want to do. I want this for me. I want to appear important. I want people to think this about me. All the little modern idols that we go after, like I mentioned before, money, sex, control, comfort, approval, all these things. We go after all that and we say, I'm just going to do this for a while. Right? And instead of it just staying with rejection, it turns into this whole redefinition. Well, this is what success looks like. This is what happiness looks like. If I want to be happy and I want to be successful, I have to live like this. People who live this way and have those things, they're amazing. They're great. Paul says we don't only do these things, we approve them. We approve of them. We celebrate them. And that's the final stage of this directional drift that happens. When sin is no longer hidden, like you got to keep this secret, all of a sudden it's honored and celebrated. Like, oh man, isn't this so great? Look at these broken relationships. Isn't that amazing? This guy's just killing it. Look at him. Look how he uses women and look how rich and wealthy he is. Isn't that amazing? Oh, look at this girl over here. You go, girl, do whatever you want. All of a sudden it turns into this celebration instead of something that should be hidden, shouldn't be celebrated, should be confronted. Here's an illustration. Like, this is what the drift looks like, right? Imagine a GPS recalculating in your car. Good thing is, like, I think this would be a good addition for AI, is if it actually, like, got a little chippy with you if you wouldn't follow the instructions all the time. Like, do you think you know a better way? Like, your GPS doesn't do that. It doesn't get mad at you when you don't follow the instructions. It just adjusts your route, right? And a lot of times we live our life this way. God says, hey, this is the route. This is the way you should go. This is what Christ followers do. This is what Christ followers don't, right? And this is the way you find life and joy and freedom. It's set very clearly. And we go, well, I'm just going to go this way. And so then we live this recalculating life, where it's like, okay, well, I'm not getting there. Maybe I need to turn here. Maybe I got to get back to the root. I got to find this way again. And it's just recalculating over and over again. But if you keep rejecting every single direction, what happens is you don't just miss turns. You end up completely lost. You end up completely lost and in a completely different place than where you intended to be. Like, this is a story of sin in our life. This is the story of rejecting God and choosing our own way, choosing everything for ourselves, choosing to be important. Like, sin isn't just breaking the rules. That's what a lot of people think. When you come to the scriptures, you're like, okay, well, so what rules do I keep and which ones do I don't? How far can I go? What's the line? Like, is this technically a sin? That's the most popular question, by the way. A pastor gets asked. No one ever gets asked, like, hey, is this technically holy? No one ever asks that. Everybody always asks, like, hey, is this technically a sin? Like, where's the loophole that I can find in? Sin isn't just breaking the rules. It's rerouting your entire life away from God. That's what sin does to us. We reroute our entire life away from God, but we hope that we can still make it to the same destination. We hope everything will get all right. The way that I say it is like, I think I can get by with it. I can get by with it eventually. This won't catch up to me. But listen, that is exactly why Jesus came. For this passage right here, for this tendency that is in each and every single one of us, this is exactly why Jesus came. Bad news is exactly why Jesus came with good news. The gospel is not just about forgiving your bad behavior. Like, get that out of your head. I know that's like kind of the baseline that people think of. It's like, okay, I'm going to believe the gospel so I can get forgiveness for my bad behavior. Yes, God offers you forgiveness in the gospel. In the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, your sin is erased. But it's not, the gospel isn't just about erasing your bad behavior. It is a rescue from this downward drift that we cannot escape despite our effort. Because we all drift. All of us drift. All of a sudden, there's an attitude that creeps in. And this attitude that creeps in, that hangs around for a little bit, all of a sudden that turns into a mindset. And all of a sudden your mindset produces actions. And all of a sudden these actions turn into habits. Like here's a very small example, right? Right now, there are things that you are bitter about that you used to be grateful for. Like right now, there's things in your life that used to be, oh, I'm so grateful for this. I'm so grateful to have this. I'm so grateful for this person. I'm so grateful for this opportunity. Right now, there are things in your life that you used to be grateful for, but an attitude crept in about it. And then all of a sudden, that attitude turns into a mindset. This is just how I think about this now. And then all of a sudden that mindset produces actions in your life, and you start doing things that are contrary to this thing that used to make you grateful, that are sabotaging this thing that you used to be grateful for. And then all of a sudden those actions just turn into habits. And now this is who you are. Like it's a drift. No one wakes up tomorrow and goes, I'm going to blow up my whole life. It started a long time ago. Like when I see pastors that pop up on Instagram, or when I see people who completely blow up their life, right? Like here's a famous one that happened the other day. Tiger Woods, a couple weeks ago, is drinking and driving and wrecks his car. Like that wasn't new. He wasn't like, oh yeah, everything's great and my life is amazing and everything. Oh, I flipped my car drunk. That's not new. That was a drift that happens. It's an attitude that turns into a mindset that feeds behaviors, that turns into a habit. This is what I mean by your idolatry. It reshapes your identity. It makes who you are. And this is why Jesus came, to rescue us. Jesus interrupts the spiral. He steps into a world, he steps into a life given over. And when Jesus comes and meets you, whether it's for the first time or whether it's on the journey of life that you're on, Jesus doesn't show up and say, look at what you've done. I can't believe the mess that you've made. How dare you do this? I thought that you were a follower of mine. That is not what Jesus says. Jesus interrupts our spiral. He steps into our path. And do you know what he says? I'll tell you what he says to me. He comes and he says, do you want to go home? Like, Don't you want to come home? You can. You can come to a place where you belong because you belong to me. This is what Jesus does for us when he steps into our spiral, into our drift towards sin and destruction, because none of us are exempt from that. And he doesn't offer condemnation. He offers us home. Do you want to come home? Because you can. Like, man, when you are exhausted from living, you are exhausted from the decisions that you make, keep on collapsing in on yourself, and it feels like things are falling apart, home sounds really, really good. It's the reason why Jesus says, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Because our pursuit of sin, of wanting our own way, wanting everything for ourselves, wanting to appear important is exhausting and empty. And Jesus offers us home. He says, you can come back. That's why one of my favorite stories is a story of the prodigal son. It's in Luke chapter number 15, if you've never read it before. It's a story where a son wants his inheritance, and he wanders off, and he spends all of his inheritance. By the way, while his father's still alive, he spends all of his inheritance doing what he wants, wanting everything for himself, wanting to appear important, and it runs out. And he comes to himself. And he says, if I could make it home, if I could just get home, even if I was a servant, it'd be better than this. And as he's coming home, it says, while he's still a long way off, the father sees him. And he doesn't run to him. He doesn't go and say, hey, don't let him come home. He rushes out to him and throws himself on top of him and gives him a robe and a ring. And he says, you're home. This is where you belong. And he throws a huge party for him. And that's exactly what God does for us when we wander, when we stray, when we're desperate to have our own way, when our sinful desires, our shameful lust, our depraved mind leads us away from him. He pursues us and welcomes us back home. Here's the big idea for the message today. The gospel is powerful because it rescues us from a very real and a very dangerous drift away from God. This passage that we read, like I said, it's super easy to think it's about someone else. But the reality is it's about me. This passage is about you. So let me ask you a question. Because this passage isn't about someone else's sin, it's about yours, where have you been drifting? Because we all do. Where have you been drifting? Maybe not dramatically, but subtly. That's how it works. You subtly drift. Where has that been happening? I'm going to ask Jamie to come up. Where have you been drifting? Let me ask you some questions, maybe with your heads bowed and your eyes closed so you can focus in. Ask this question. What am I resisting that God has already made clear? What am I resisting? What am I pushing against? What am I running from? What am I fighting against that God has already made clear? How about this one? What voice have you stopped listening to? I think all of us can relate to this. When you sense that the Holy Spirit is leading you, when you know you're in a good direction, when things are just clicking on all cylinders, you feel life, you feel that vitality, you feel that fellowship with God, and all of a sudden it's not there. It's like, well, did God disappear? He's probably still talking. You just stopped listening. What voice have you stopped listening to? What modern idol are you worshiping? You say, well, Brian, you're making a big assumption. Yeah, you bet I am. What modern idol are you worshiping? Approval? You have to hear good job from everyone? And if people aren't saying a good job, then your life has no meaning. Your day is terrible. You have to have that approval. Is it money? You think, man, if I just had more money, my whole life would be great. Is it stuff? You just want what the other guy has? You scroll on Instagram and you see the life that someone else is living and you go, man, must be nice. I wish I had that. It just fills your algorithm and fills your mind and heart. Maybe it's control. You have to be in charge. You have to know the answer. You have to know what's next. You have to fix the situation. Maybe it's comfort. Say, man, life is just so hard. I'm just looking to coast. Be careful. Be careful. You only coast downhill. Don't normalize what God calls destructive. He says, this is bad for you. I'm better than this. Realign your worship to God. That's what this is. It's an invitation for that, to realign your heart with his heart. We read a passage like this, and there's a lot. It can be scary. But understand, it's not God pushing you away. It's him calling you back. It's him coming to you right now in your drift and saying, do you want to come home? You can come back. Lord, I'm grateful for your love for me, for your grace that you extend to me, grace that is greater than all my sin, grace that is brand new every morning, grace that comes and finds me even in my pursuit away from you, when I try to hide from you, when my heart wants to pursue other things, things that I think will make me happy or think will heal the wound in my heart, or the things that I think will satisfy my longing. It has always been you. And even as your child, I forget that. Prone to wander. Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. God, I pray that you would take our hearts. We offer them to you. That you would heal. That you would take these calluses that I build up on my heart because I want to worship something else. I want to be in love with something else that isn't you. God, I pray that you would renew us. That begin with our attitudes. God, help us to recognize the different attitudes that we have about people, about you, about God, what you have us doing here right now. Help us to realign our attitudes. Help it to shape our mindsets, renew our minds. And the actions that we take be glorifying to you. The habits that we have be edifying to other people, building them up, encouraging them. God, make us more like you. Help us to worship you in spirit and in truth, our whole selves, our real selves. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen and amen. You guys worship with me.